The sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elizabeth wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at the small wooden house she called home. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was hers. Every board, every nail, every stone in the fireplace represented her hard work. 3 years had passed since she buried her husband under the old cottonwood tree near the creek. 3 long years of learning how to survive alone in this harsh, beautiful land. Some days were easier than others. Some days she forgot what her own voice sounded like because she hadn't spoken to another human being in weeks. Elizabeth walked to the well and pulled up a bucket of water. The rope was rough against her hands, calloused from work. She poured the cool water into a basin and splashed her face. The nearest town was 2 days away by horse, and she only went there twice a year to trade furs and buy supplies she couldn't make herself. Sugar, salt, coffee, ammunition, that was about all she needed from the outside world. Her husband, Thomas, had chosen this spot carefully before he died. Good water, decent soil, and far enough from trouble. Back then, trouble meant bandits, hostile encounters, and the constant tension between settlers and the native tribes who had lived here for generations. Thomas had been a fair man, respectful of everyone. He'd traded honestly with the Apache people when they came through, never cheated them, never caused problems. Elizabeth tried to honor his way of doing things. She fed her horse, a sturdy mare named Dust, and checked the chicken coop. 4 eggs today, not bad. The chickens clucked softly as she reached under them, and she found herself talking to them like old friends. Sometimes she wondered if she was going a bit crazy out here, chatting with chickens and having full conversations with her horse. But crazy or not, it kept her sane in a strange way. As darkness fell, Elizabeth lit a lantern and sat on her porch with her rifle across her lap. This was her routine. Watch the desert as night came, listen to the coyotes sing, and make sure nothing unexpected was creeping toward her home. The desert was full of dangers. Mountain lions, rattlesnakes, the occasional bear, and sometimes men who were worse than any animal. But Elizabeth had learned to handle herself. Thomas had taught her to shoot before he got sick, and she'd gotten even better after he died. She could hit a rabbit at 50 yards and had once killed a wolf that came after her chickens. The rifle wasn't just for show. Out here, being able to protect yourself meant the difference between living and dying. That night, she made a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and a bit of dried meat. She ate slowly, making the food last, savoring each bite. When you lived alone, meals weren't just about filling your stomach. They were moments to slow down, to think, to remember that you were still human and not just a working machine. After dinner, she sat by the fire and worked on a rabbit fur she was preparing to trade. Her hands moved automatically, scraping and stretching the hide. This was another part of survival. The furs she collected throughout the year would buy her supplies. Every rabbit, every fox, every deer hide had value. Nothing went to waste out here. The wind picked up outside, and Elizabeth could hear it whistling through the canyon. Desert winds could be gentle or fierce, and tonight it sounded like a storm was coming. She added another log to the fire and pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. The house creaked and groaned, but she'd reinforced it well. It would hold. Morning came with that special kind of silence that only the desert knows. Elizabeth woke before sunrise as always and started her day. Water the garden, feed the animals, check the traps she'd set the day before. The routine was comforting in its predictability. Each task led to the next, and before she knew it, half the day would be gone. But this morning something was different. As she walked to the well to draw water for the garden, she noticed the pump handle felt loose. She tried it again and her heart sank. The wooden arm that connected the handle to the pump mechanism had cracked. Without this pump, getting water would be nearly impossible. The well was deep, and hauling water up bucket by bucket would take all day, every day. Elizabeth knelt beside the pump and examined the damage. The wood had split right through, probably from the constant use in the dry climate. She'd need to replace the entire arm, which meant cutting a new piece of wood, shaping it, fitting it properly. It was possible, but it would take time and effort she hadn't planned on spending. She stood up and looked around her small homestead. The garden was starting to show green shoots, promising vegetables in a few weeks. The chickens were healthy and laying well. Everything was going fine until this moment. But this was the reality of living alone. When something broke, there was no one to call, no neighbor to help, no husband to fix it. There was only her tools, and her determination. The next few days were harder than Elizabeth expected. She found a suitable piece of oak from her woodpile, and began shaping it to fit the pump. The work was slow and demanding. Her hands developed new blisters on top of old calluses, but she kept at it, taking breaks only when absolutely necessary. During one of these breaks, sitting in the shade of her porch, Elizabeth allowed herself a moment of honest reflection. She was tired, not just physically tired from the work, but tired deep in her bones from the loneliness. 3 years was a long time to live without hearing another human voice, without sharing a meal, without someone to talk to about the small worries and joys of daily life. She thought about going back east where she came from, where her sister still lived with her family. She could probably find work there, maybe as a seamstress or a teacher. She'd have company, conversation, a normal life. But even as she thought about it, she knew she wouldn't go. This land had claimed her somehow. For all its harshness, for all the loneliness, there was something about the vast open sky and the endless desert that felt like freedom. She'd rather be alone and free than surrounded by people in a place that didn't feel like home. On the 4th day of working on the pump, Elizabeth finally got the new arm fitted and working. She tested it carefully, pumping the handle up and down. Water gushed out clear and cold. She actually laughed out loud, a sound that startled her because she heard it so rarely. The pump worked. She'd fixed it herself. That evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Elizabeth felt a sense of pride. She'd faced a problem and solved it. She was surviving, and not just barely. She was actually living, making a life in this impossible place. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she talked to chickens. Maybe she went weeks without seeing another person. But she was standing on her own 2 feet, and that meant something. The desert stretched out before her, endless and mysterious. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and canyons, other people were living their lives. Other stories were unfolding. But here in this moment, it was just Elizabeth and the land, existing together in a kind of understanding. She didn't know it yet. But her solitary life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The desert kept its secrets well, and what was coming would test everything she thought she knew about survival, about trust, and about what it meant to truly belong somewhere. 2 weeks after fixing the pump, Elizabeth decided to go hunting. Her supply of dried meat was running low, and she'd seen deer tracks near the creek the day before. She packed light, just her rifle, some water, and a knife. The morning air was cool, perfect for tracking. She followed the creek upstream, moving quietly through the brush. The tracks were fresh, maybe from early that morning. A decent-sized buck from the look of it. Her mouth almost watered thinking about fresh venison. She could dry most of it, keep her fed for weeks. The trail led her further from home than she usually went, up into the rocky hills where the canyon narrowed. She'd been walking for about 2 hours when she spotted blood on the rocks. Not deer blood. The trail was wrong for that. She knelt down and touched it carefully. Still slightly warm. Elizabeth's instincts told her to turn back. Blood meant trouble, and trouble was something she'd learned to avoid. But something else, maybe curiosity or maybe compassion, made her follow the trail. It led around a bend and down toward a small pool of water fed by a spring. That's when she saw him. An old man lay crumpled near the water's edge. His skin was weathered and dark, his long gray hair spread around him. He wore traditional Apache clothing, and even from a distance, Elizabeth could see the quality of his garments. This wasn't just anyone. The beadwork, the way he carried himself even in unconsciousness, spoke of importance. She approached carefully, her rifle ready, but not aimed. As she got closer, she could see his leg was badly swollen, with 2 puncture marks visible on his calf. Snakebite, probably a rattlesnake from the look of it. His breathing was shallow, his skin had a grayish tint. He was dying. Elizabeth knew she should walk away. The tensions between settlers and Apache were complicated and dangerous. If someone found her helping him, there could be consequences. If his people found her near him, they might think she'd caused this. Every logical thought told her to leave, but she couldn't. She'd lost her husband to fever while feeling helpless. She'd watched him slip away, unable to do anything. Maybe that's why she knelt beside this stranger and checked his pulse. It was weak but steady. He was still fighting. Elizabeth looked around and spotted a small cave about 50 yards away, tucked into the canyon wall. It would provide shelter and shade. She couldn't move him far in his condition, but she could get him there. She dragged him as gently as possible, and he groaned but didn't wake. His skin was burning with fever. Once in the cave, she went to work. First, water. She made him drink small sips, supporting his head. Then she examined the snakebite, It was bad, probably a day old already. The venom had spread, but he was still alive, which meant he was strong. She'd learned some remedies from Thomas, who'd picked up knowledge from various tribes during his years out west. Elizabeth gathered what she needed: tobacco from her pouch to make a poultice, strips from her spare cloth to wrap the wound. She worked carefully, talking to him even though he couldn't hear her. "You picked a bad spot to get bit, old-timer," she said softly, cleaning the wound. "But you're tough. I can tell. You've got fight in you still." She made a fire at the cave entrance, small enough not to draw attention, but big enough to boil water. She needed to keep him warm and get fluids in him. That first day was touch and go. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering in Apache, sometimes just moaning in pain. Elizabeth stayed with him. She went back to the creek for fresh water, gathered herbs she recognized, and kept the fire going. At night, she slept sitting up, her rifle across her lap, listening for any sounds of danger. On the second day, his fever broke a little. His eyes opened briefly, dark and intelligent, studying her face. He seemed surprised to see her, a white woman caring for him in a cave. He tried to speak but couldn't manage it. She gave him more water and some broth she'd made from dried meat. "Don't try to talk," she told him. "Save your strength. You're going to need it." He watched her for a long moment, then closed his eyes again. But something had shifted. She could feel it. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was healing. The third day was better. He was able to sit up slightly and drink on his own. His leg was still swollen, but the worst of the venom seemed to have worked through his system. Elizabeth changed his bandages and was relieved to see the wound wasn't infected. That afternoon, he finally spoke. His voice was rough, barely a whisper, but she understood the Apache word for water. She gave him the water skin, and he drank deeply. Then he looked at her and spoke in broken English. "Why you help?" Elizabeth thought about it. Why had she helped? "Because you needed it," she said simply. "And because leaving someone to die isn't right. Not to me." He studied her face for a long time, as if memorizing every feature. Then he nodded slowly, a gesture of respect. "You have good heart," he said. "Spirits see this." Over the next few days, he grew stronger. Elizabeth learned his name was Nantan, which meant chief. She'd been right about his importance. He was a leader of his people, respected and honored. He'd been traveling alone, something he admitted was foolish for a man his age. When the rattlesnake struck, Nantan told her stories during his recovery, teaching her words in Apache, learning more English from her. Despite their different worlds, they found common ground in their love of the land, their respect for nature, their understanding that life was precious and fragile. "You live alone?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Yes," Elizabeth admitted. 3 years now. "My husband died of fever," Nantan nodded thoughtfully. "Alone is hard. People need people. Is our way. Is all people way." "Maybe," Elizabeth said. "But sometimes alone is safer than the wrong company." "This true," he agreed. "But also sad." On the 6th day, Elizabeth heard horses. Nantan heard them too and sat up straighter. "My people," he said. "They look for me." Elizabeth felt a moment of fear. Would they understand? Would they be angry? But Nantan raised his hand calmly. "No fear, I tell them. You save life. This important." 7 warriors appeared at the cave entrance, young and strong, their faces painted for tracking. They took in the scene quickly, their leader stepping forward. He and Nantan spoke rapidly in Apache, and Elizabeth caught her name several times. The warriors looked at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Not anger, but something else. Surprise, maybe. Respect. Nantan spoke to her one last time before they helped him onto a horse. "I owe you life debt," he said seriously. "This not small thing in Apache way. My people remember." "I remember. You have mark of protection now." He pressed something into her hand. It was a small stone, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. "You keep this. Put on your door. Any Apache see, they know you, friend." Elizabeth watched them ride away, the old chief looking back once to raise his hand in farewell. She stood there for a long time after they disappeared, holding the carved stone and wondering what had just happened. When she returned home, she hung the stone above her door, as Nantan had instructed. It looked strange there, this Apache symbol on her settler's cabin, but it felt right somehow. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, helped someone she wasn't supposed to help, and in doing so, had changed something fundamental about her place in this desert. Elizabeth went back to her routines, to her solitary life. But something was different now. She felt less alone somehow, like she'd made a connection that went deeper than words, deeper than the divisions between their peoples. She'd saved a life, and that life had marked her as worthy of protection. She had no idea that this simple act of compassion would come back to change her entire world. She didn't know that the life debt Nantan spoke of was sacred and binding. She couldn't imagine what was being discussed in the Apache camp as the old chief recovered, or what decisions were being made about her future. All she knew was that she'd done what felt right, and she'd do it again if given the choice. The desert had tested her in a new way, and she'd passed. Now all she could do was wait and see what came next. 3 weeks passed after Elizabeth helped the old chief. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it ever was. She worked her garden, tended her animals, and went about the business of surviving. Sometimes she'd look at the carved stone above her door and wonder about Nantan, hoping he'd recovered fully. The stone seemed to work like he'd promised. Twice she'd seen Apache scouts in the distance, watching her homestead. They never approached, never threatened, just observed and moved on. It gave her a strange sense of security, knowing that symbol meant something to them. Then came the morning that changed everything. Elizabeth woke before dawn, as usual. But something felt different. The air was too quiet. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. She grabbed her rifle instinctively and moved to the window. That's when she saw them. 7 men sat on horses in a semicircle in front of her house. Apache warriors, still as statues, waiting. They hadn't made a sound. No call, no knock, no announcement. They'd simply appeared like ghosts in the early morning light. Her heart pounded. 7 armed warriors at her door could mean anything. Maybe they were angry about something. Maybe the peace between her and them was over. Maybe they blamed her for something she didn't understand. She checked her rifle, made sure it was loaded, and stepped onto the porch. The warriors didn't move. They watched her with dark, serious eyes. These weren't the same men who'd come for Nantan. These were different, younger mostly, though one looked to be in his 40s. They wore traditional clothing, their long hair decorated with feathers and beads. Their faces were paint-free today, which Elizabeth had learned meant they came in peace. One of them, the oldest, dismounted slowly. He was tall and lean, with gray streaking his black hair. He held up his hand in a gesture of peace, then spoke in careful English. "You are the woman who saved Nantan," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Elizabeth replied, keeping her voice steady. "Is he well?" "He lived 3 more weeks," the man said. "He spoke of you every day. He told his people what you did." Then the fever came back. "He died 5 days ago." Elizabeth felt a pang of sadness. She'd barely known the old chief, but she'd liked him. He'd been kind and wise. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "He was a good man." "He was our chief," the warrior continued. "And you saved his life. This creates debt, life debt. You understand?" Elizabeth shook her head. "Not really. I just did what anyone should do." "No," the warrior said firmly. "Not anyone would do this. White woman alone helping Apache chief. This dangerous for you. This brave. This honorable. Nantan said you have good heart, good spirit. He said debt must be paid." Another warrior dismounted, younger than the first, maybe in his late 20s. He stepped forward and spoke in English that was smoother, more practiced. "In our way, life debt is sacred. When someone saves a life, especially life of chief, this debt passes to family. We are Nantan's family, brothers, sons, nephews. We must honor debt." Elizabeth lowered her rifle slightly. They weren't here to harm her. But she still didn't understand what they wanted. "I don't need payment," she said. "I didn't help him for reward." "We know," the first warrior said. "This make it more important. You helped with no thought of gain. This is true honor. So we come with offer." A third warrior dismounted, this one younger still, maybe 25. He looked nervous, excited. When he spoke, his English was rougher, but understandable. "You live alone. This hard, this dangerous. You need protection, need help, need family." "I manage fine," Elizabeth said, though part of her knew it wasn't completely true. The oldest warrior shook his head. "You strong woman. We see this. But alone is not good. Our people, we believe no one should be alone. Family is everything. So we offer you family." Elizabeth's confusion grew. "I don't understand what you're asking." The warriors looked at each other. The oldest one took a breath and spoke again. "Our band lost many women. Sickness, war, many things. We have few women now. Our way of life, it is changing. Old Chief worried about this before he died. He said you save his life, so we must save yours. We must give you what you need. A fourth warrior dismounted. He was perhaps 30 with kind eyes. He spoke slowly, making sure she understood each word. We offer marriage. All 7 of us. We become your husbands, you become our wife. We protect you, provide for you, care for you. You never alone again. Elizabeth felt like she'd been struck by lightning. She actually took a step back. What, all 7 of you? That's not possible. That's not how things work. Is not your way, the oldest warrior agreed, but is done sometimes in our way when women are few, when life debt is great. We talked many days about this. This is best answer. This honors debt and helps everyone. I can't marry 7 men, Elizabeth said, her voice rising. That's crazy. That's impossible. A 5th warrior dismounted. This one looked to be in his mid-30s. His face was scarred, marking him as a fighter who'd seen battle. But his voice was gentle. We do not force, we offer. You say no, we leave. But we come back, protect you from distance. You always under Nantan's protection because of life debt. This never end. But why marriage? Elizabeth asked, still trying to wrap her mind around it. The youngest warrior, who couldn't be more than 22, finally spoke. His English was the worst of all, broken and halting. Because debt this big need big answer. You save chief. You save leader. You risk everything. So we offer everything. We offer family, protection, belonging. We offer you are not alone anymore. The 6th warrior, the last to dismount, was perhaps 28. He'd been silent until now, just watching her with intelligent eyes. You think about it, he said. We not need answer now. We camp near. We stay 3 days. You watch us, we watch you. You see we are good men, then you decide. The 7th warrior remained on his horse. He was the youngest, barely 20 if that. He looked eager, almost hopeful. The oldest warrior gestured to him. This is Kuruk, he want to prove himself, show he is man. You would be his first wife. For others you would be second or third. Some wives died, some divorced, some married to other men in other bands. This normal in our way. Elizabeth's mind was spinning. This was the most insane thing she'd ever heard. 7 husbands. Living with Apache warriors. Leaving behind everything she knew. But as she looked at them, she saw something that surprised her. They were serious but not threatening. They were offering, not demanding. And in their eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in 3 years. She saw people who wanted to include her, to make her part of something. I need time, she said finally. This is not a small decision. We know, the oldest warrior said. This why we camp near. We stay close. We show you who we are. We help with work if you allow. We hunt, bring meat. We fix things that need fixing. You see we are good men, not bad. Then you choose. They remounted their horses, all except the oldest, who stepped closer. My name is Dakota. This is Bidzil Ashki, Goyathle, Neol Elsu, and Kuruk, he said, pointing to each warrior in turn. We are brothers and cousins. We are good hunters, good fighters, good men. We want to honor our chief's dead. We want to honor you. I'm Elizabeth, she said quietly. Elizabeth. Dakota repeated, testing the name. Good name. Strong name. We camp by creek. You need anything, you call. We hear. We come. They rode away slowly, not hurrying, letting her watch them go. Elizabeth stood on her porch for a long time after they disappeared, her rifle hanging loose in her hand. Her mind couldn't quite process what had just happened. 7 men wanted to marry her. 7 Apache warriors wanted to make her their wife, share her, protect her, become her family. It was insane. It was impossible. It went against everything she'd been raised to believe about marriage and propriety and the right way to live. But it was also the most honest offer anyone had made her in years. They weren't trying to trick her or trap her. They were offering a solution to her loneliness and their obligation. They were being direct and honorable about something that should have been shameful but somehow wasn't. Elizabeth went inside and sat down heavily in her chair. She looked around her small cabin, the empty chair across from her where Thomas used to sit, the silent walls, the endless quiet that sometimes felt like it would swallow her whole. She thought about the years ahead, more of the same, growing older alone, becoming that strange hermit woman people whispered about. Then she thought about those 7 men, the serious way they'd made their offer, the respect in their eyes, the promise of never being alone again. She had 3 days to decide. 3 days to choose between the life she knew and something completely different. 3 days to figure out if she was brave enough to accept an offer that went against everything she'd been taught. Elizabeth stood up and went to the window. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from the creek area. They'd made camp just like they said. They were already there, keeping their promise. She touched the carved stone hanging above her door. Nantan had given this to her as protection. Now his family was offering her more. Not just protection, but belonging. The question was whether she had the courage to accept it. The first day, Elizabeth watched them from a distance. She went about her usual chores, but her eyes kept drifting toward the creek where their camp was. She could see them moving around, hear occasional sounds of conversation and laughter. They seemed relaxed, not anxious or aggressive. Just men living their lives, waiting patiently for her answer. Around midday, she noticed something. Her fence, the one that enclosed her garden, had several broken posts she'd been meaning to fix for weeks. She'd kept putting it off because it was hard work, and she had so many other things to do. But now, as she watched, 2 of the warriors approached the fence. They didn't come to the house or call out to her. They simply started working on the fence. Elizabeth stepped onto her porch, curious. The 2 men were Ashki and Neil, if she remembered the names correctly. They worked efficiently, clearly skilled at this kind of repair. They'd brought tools and new wood with them. Within an hour, 3 of the broken posts were replaced and secured. When they finished, they didn't approach her for thanks or acknowledgement. They simply nodded in her direction and walked back to their camp. The message was clear. They would help her whether she accepted their offer or not. The life debt meant something to them. That evening, as the sun set, Elizabeth found a freshly killed deer hanging from a tree near her house. She hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't seen them do it, but there it was, cleaned and ready to be butchered. More help, given freely, expecting nothing in return. She stood there looking at the deer, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to be angry at their presumption. She hadn't asked for help. She'd been managing fine on her own. But another part of her, the honest part, had to admit it felt good. It felt good to have someone care whether she had meat for the winter. It felt good not to carry every burden alone. The second day started with rain, a heavy desert rain that drummed on her roof and turned the dusty ground to mud. Elizabeth stayed inside, working on mending clothes and doing indoor tasks. She found herself wondering if the warriors were okay in their camp. Did they have good shelter? Were they dry? Around noon, the rain stopped. Elizabeth opened her door to find 4 rabbits hanging from her porch railing. She hadn't heard anyone approach during the rain. They were like ghosts, these men, moving silently, helping without being asked. That afternoon, she saw them all together for the first time since that first morning. They were by the creek, and they seemed to be teaching the youngest one, Kuruk, something. She watched as they demonstrated fighting moves, showing him techniques, correcting his stance. They were patient with him, encouraging. It reminded her of how brothers should be, looking out for each other, teaching, protecting. Dakota caught her watching and raised his hand in greeting. She hesitated, then raised her own hand in response. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant somehow. An acknowledgement. A connection. As evening approached, Elizabeth made a decision. She couldn't keep hiding in her house, watching from a distance. If she was going to make a real choice, she needed to know these men better. She needed to talk to them, understand them, see who they really were beyond this strange proposal. She walked down to the creek as the sun was setting. All 7 warriors looked up as she approached, but they didn't crowd her or make a fuss. They simply made space for her near their fire, offering her a seat on a log. "Thank you for the fence," she said. "And the deer. And the rabbits?" Dakota nodded. "We see what needs doing. We do it, this is our way. We take care of our people." "But I'm not your people," Elizabeth said quietly. "Not yet," Bidzil said with a slight smile. "But maybe yes." "We hope yes," Elizabeth took a breath. "I need to understand this better. In my world, marriage is 1 man, 1 woman. What you're offering, it's not something I was raised to understand or accept." Goyathle, the scarred warrior, spoke up. "In your world, maybe. But your world left you alone. Your world did not come when your husband died. Your world did not help when you needed it. We offer a different world. Better world, maybe." "It's not that simple," Elizabeth said. "Why not?" young Kuruk asked. His English was improving, she noticed. You alone, we alone. Together, not alone, simple. People will judge, Elizabeth said. Other settlers, the army, everyone. They'll call it wrong. Let them call it wrong, Elsu said, his intelligent eyes studying her. They not living your life. They not the ones alone every night. They not the ones fixing fence by themselves, hunting by themselves, fighting to survive by themselves. What they think should not matter more than what you need. His words hit harder than Elizabeth expected. He was right. What did it matter what people in the distant settlement thought? They never came to check on her. They never offered help. They probably barely remembered she existed. Tell me how it would work, she said finally. If I agreed, which I'm not saying I am, but if I did, how would this arrangement work? The warriors exchanged glances and Dakota spoke. We live both places. Some days here, some days at our camp. We hunt, bring food. We protect, fix things, help with hard work. You teach us your ways, we teach you ours. We share everything. Food, work, life, and the marriage part? Elizabeth asked, feeling her cheeks heat up. Neil, who had been quiet until now, answered gently. We respect you. We not force anything. Marriage grows slow, like plant. First friendship, then trust, then maybe more. Each man different. You maybe like some more than others. This okay, we brothers. We not compete, we share. But how can 7 men share 1 woman? Elizabeth asked. Won't there be jealousy? Fighting? Maybe sometimes, Dakota admitted. We human, but we raised to understand sharing. We raised to think of family first, self second. 1 woman with 7 men better than 7 men with no woman. Better than 1 woman alone with no one. Ashki leaned forward. In our band, 3 other families like this. Not 7 men, but 3 men share 1 wife or 4 men share 1 wife. It work because everyone agree. Everyone choose it, no force. No one angry because they choose this way. Elizabeth sat with this information, trying to imagine it. 3 days ago, such a thing would have seemed impossible. Disgusting even. But now, sitting here with these men, seeing their sincerity, it seemed less crazy. Still strange, still frightening, but not impossible. What if I say yes and then change my mind? She asked. Then you change mind? Dakota said simply. We not prison. You free to leave any time. We hope you stay, but we not keep you if you want go. And what would I be to you? Just a wife. Just someone to cook and clean? Bidzil shook his head firmly. You are person. You have thoughts, ideas, skills. You teach us, we teach you. You are partner, not servant. Apache women strong, have voice, make decisions. We want strong woman, not weak one. You strong. This why we offer. They talked until the stars came out. Elizabeth asked questions and they answered honestly. They told her about their lives, their losses, their hopes. Each man had his own story. Dakota had lost his wife to sickness 3 years ago. Bidzil had been divorced when his wife chose another man. Goyathle's wife had died in childbirth along with the baby. The others had never married, waiting for the right situation. They were real people with real pain and real loneliness, just like her. This wasn't some strange cultural practice that made no sense. It was people trying to survive, trying to build family, trying not to be alone in a hard world. As Elizabeth walked back to her house that night, her mind was swirling. She still hadn't made a decision, but something had shifted. These weren't strangers anymore. They were men she was beginning to know, beginning to understand, men who seemed genuinely kind and honorable. The 3rd day, Elizabeth woke with a sense of clarity she hadn't expected. She did her morning chores, fed her animals, and made herself a simple breakfast. And as she ate, she thought about what her life would look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years if she said no. More of the same. More loneliness. More struggling alone with every problem. More nights sitting by the fire with no one to talk to. More years watching herself grow old without companionship, without family, without belonging to anything or anyone. Then she thought about what life might look like if she said yes. Scary, yes. Different, absolutely. But also full of possibility. Full of voices and laughter and help and belonging. Full of people who wanted to include her, not push her away. She looked around her little cabin one more time. This place represented her independence, her survival, her strength. She'd built this life with her own hands. But maybe being strong didn't mean doing everything alone. Maybe being strong meant being brave enough to accept help when it was offered. Brave enough to try something different. Elizabeth stood up and walked to her door. She took down the carved stone that Nantan had given her and held it in her hand. The old chief had saved her in a way by giving her this protection. Now his family was offering to save her again. in a different way. She walked down to the creek where the 7 warriors were breaking camp. They looked up as she approached, and she could see the question in their eyes. This was the 3rd day. Time for her answer. Elizabeth took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "I have conditions," she said. The warriors went still, listening. "This is a partnership," she continued. "I'm not property. I'm not a servant. I have a voice in decisions that affect my life." Elizabeth woke before dawn on the day that would change her life forever. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions and doubts. But when the first light touched the horizon, she got up and prepared herself as best she could. She put on her cleanest dress, the blue one Thomas had always liked. She brushed her hair until it shined and braided it carefully. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. When she stepped outside, the 7 warriors were already there, waiting in respectful silence. But they weren't alone. Several Apache women had come with them, older women who smiled at Elizabeth kindly. One of them approached carrying something wrapped in soft leather. "I am Desba," the woman said in careful English. "Sister of Nantan. He was my brother. You saved him. Now you join our family." She unwrapped the leather to reveal a beautiful dress, traditional Apache style with intricate beadwork. "You wear this. You join 2 worlds today. We honor both." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. These women didn't have to accept her. They could have been angry, resentful, but instead they were welcoming her. The women helped her change, their hands gentle, their voices soft and encouraging. They wove feathers and beads into her hair, painted her face with careful symbols. She felt herself transforming into something new, something that belonged to both worlds. When they finished, they led her to the creek where the ceremony would take place. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The 7 warriors stood in a line, dressed in their finest clothing. Each wore feathers and face paint, ceremonial and dignified. Behind them stood more Apache people, men and women from their band, come to witness this unusual union. Dakota stepped forward first. An elder woman, the oldest Elizabeth had seen, stood beside him. She spoke in Apache, her voice strong despite her age. Desba translated quietly for Elizabeth. "She says this ceremony's sacred. This binds 8 people together as family. Each warrior makes promise. Each promise is vow that cannot be broken without dishonor. You listen, you understand, then you make your promise." Dakota took Elizabeth's hand gently. His palm was calloused and warm. He spoke in Apache first, then in English for her benefit. "I promise to protect you with my life. I promise to provide for you always. I promise to honor your voice and your spirit. I promise to be loyal and true. I promise to teach you our ways and learn your ways. This I swear before the spirits and before my people." He released her hand and Bidziel stepped forward. He took her hand and made his vow, his voice steady and sincere. "I promise to make you laugh when you are sad. I promise to share all I have. I promise to respect you as equal. I promise to never raise my hand in anger. I promise to be your friend before I am your husband. This I swear before the spirits and before my people." One by one, each warrior came forward. Ashki promised patience and understanding. Goyathle promised strength and courage on her behalf. Nyul promised wisdom and honest counsel. Elsu promised to always listen before speaking. And young Kuruk, his voice shaking slightly with emotion, promised to prove himself worthy every day of his life. Then it was Elizabeth's turn. Her heart pounded as she looked at the 7 men who had just pledged themselves to her. Desba handed her a ceremonial knife, not for harm, but as a symbol. "You cut your palm just small. Each man does same. Blood mixes. Family becomes one." Elizabeth took a breath and spoke, trying to keep her voice steady. "I promise to respect each of you as individuals. I promise to be honest always, even when truth is hard. I promise to work beside you, not behind you. I promise to learn your ways and teach you mine. I promise to honor this family we are creating. This I swear before your spirits and your people." She made a small cut on her palm, wincing at the sting. Each warrior did the same, and one by one they pressed their palms to hers, mixing their blood with hers. 8 people becoming one family through this ancient ritual. The elder woman tied their hands together with a strip of leather decorated with beads, chanting in Apache. Then, surprisingly, Elizabeth spoke again. "May I say something in my way too?" The elder woman nodded, curious. Elizabeth closed her eyes and spoke a simple prayer, the kind her mother had taught her as a child. She asked for blessing on this union, for strength to face whatever came, for wisdom to navigate this new life. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find all the Apache people watching her with respect. She'd honored their way, and now she'd honored hers. Two worlds meeting, two traditions joining. The elder woman unwrapped their hands and declared something in Apache that made everyone smile. Desba translated, "She says you are now family. You are now one. May the spirits bless this union and all who come from it." The gathered people began to celebrate. Food appeared, more than Elizabeth had seen in years. Roasted meat, corn cakes, berries, dishes she didn't recognize but smelled wonderful. Music started. Drums and flutes creating rhythms that made her heart beat faster. The Apache people danced, and they pulled Elizabeth into the circle, teaching her the steps, laughing when she stumbled but encouraging her to try again. The 7 warriors danced with her, each taking a turn. Dakota was graceful and sure. Bidziel made her laugh with his exaggerated movements. Ashki was gentle, making sure she didn't trip. Goyatle was surprisingly light on his feet despite his size. Neil moved with deliberate precision. Elsu danced like he was having a conversation with the music. And Kuruk danced with pure joy, his happiness infectious. As the celebration continued, Elizabeth felt something shift inside her. The fear began to fade, replaced by something else. Belonging. She belonged here now. These were her people, her family. It was strange and unexpected, but it was real. Later, when the sun was high and most people had returned to their camp, Elizabeth found herself sitting with her 7 husbands by the creek. The word felt strange in her mind, husbands, 7 of them. She still couldn't quite believe it. "What happens now?" she asked. Dakota smiled. "Now we live. We work together. We learn about each other. We build our life. Where will everyone sleep?" Elizabeth asked, practical concerns surfacing. "We expand your house," Neil said. "Make it bigger. Until then, some of us sleep outside, some inside. We take turns. No one minds. And the work? How do we divide everything?" "We figure it out as we go," Elsu said. "Some things you do better, some things we do better. We learn together." Over the next few days, life took on a new rhythm. The warriors were true to their word. They began expanding her small cabin, adding rooms and space. They worked efficiently, and Elizabeth found herself working alongside them, learning their building techniques while teaching them some of hers. Bidziel turned out to be an excellent cook, creating dishes that combined Apache and settler foods in surprising ways. Ashki had a gift with animals and helped improve her chicken coop, making it safer and more productive. Goyathle was the best hunter and kept them supplied with fresh meat. Neil understood the land and helped her expand her garden using Apache growing techniques. Elsu could fix anything, from tools to wagon wheels to her water pump. Dakota coordinated everything, making sure all the work got done without anyone being overwhelmed. And young Kuruk, eager to prove himself, took on the hardest physical tasks without complaint. Elizabeth found herself teaching too. She taught them more English, helping them read and write. She showed them how to preserve food in ways they hadn't used before. She shared her knowledge of herbs and medicine from her own tradition. It became an exchange, a true partnership. The sleeping arrangements sorted themselves out naturally. Elizabeth kept her room her private space. The warriors built a large communal room where they could gather, talk, sleep when it was their turn. Nobody pushed her for anything she wasn't ready for. The marriage existed, but it was growing slowly, like Neol had said, like a plant. Some evenings they would all sit together and talk for hours. Elizabeth learned their stories in depth. Dakota told her about his wife, how much he'd loved her, how empty he'd felt after she died. Bidziel made them all laugh with tales of his childhood mischief. Ashki spoke quietly about his dreams of peace between all peoples. Goyathle shared his fears about the changing world and the future of his people. Neol taught her about the stars and Apache beliefs about the universe. Elsu challenged her mind with complex questions about life and meaning. And Kuruk, young and enthusiastic, asked her endless questions about her world, wanting to understand everything. Elizabeth found herself opening up too, sharing stories about Thomas, about her life before Arizona, about her fears and hopes. They listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed this. People to talk to, people who cared about what she thought and felt. One evening, about 2 weeks after the ceremony, Elizabeth sat on her porch with Dakota. The others were preparing dinner, their voices carrying in the evening air. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. Dakota looked at her with concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Elizabeth said. "That's what I need to tell you. I thought this would be harder. I thought I'd regret it or feel trapped. But I don't. I feel like I've found something I didn't know I was missing." Dakota smiled, genuine pleasure in his eyes. "We feel same. We thought maybe you would leave, change your mind. But you stay." For 2 peaceful months, Elizabeth lived in her new reality. The homestead had transformed from a lonely outpost into a thriving compound. The expanded house was nearly finished. The garden flourished with new crops, and life had settled into comfortable patterns. She'd grown close to each of her husbands in different ways. With Dakota, she discussed important decisions. With Bidzil, she laughed until her sides hurt. With Ashki, she found quiet companionship. With Goyathle, she felt protected. With Neil, she learned wisdom. With Elsu, she debated ideas. And with Kuruk, she found youthful joy. Everything was going well. Too well, perhaps. Elizabeth should have known it couldn't last. It was a Thursday morning when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. "Riders moving fast." Her stomach dropped. Dakota saw them too and immediately called the others. Within minutes, all 7 warriors were there, alert but not panicked. They'd known this day might come. How many? Goyathle asked, his hand on his knife. "Maybe 10, Dakota said, his eyes sharp. "Soldiers, cavalry." Elizabeth's heart pounded. "They're coming here?" "Yes," Dakota said simply. "Someone told them about us." Someone talked. The patrol arrived an hour later. 10 mounted soldiers led by a young lieutenant who looked barely old enough to shave. He held up his hand as his men surrounded the homestead, rifles ready. The 7 Apache warriors stood in a protective line in front of Elizabeth, their faces calm but their bodies tense. "We're looking for Elizabeth Mitchell," the lieutenant called out. "We've received reports that she's being held captive by hostile Indians." Elizabeth pushed through the warriors, ignoring Dakota's attempt to keep her back. "I'm Elizabeth Mitchell," she said clearly. "And I'm not being held captive by anyone." The lieutenant looked confused. He was young, probably fresh from back east, following orders he didn't fully understand. "Ma'am, are you saying you're here of your own free will? Living with these savages?" Elizabeth felt anger flash through her. "These men are my husbands, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't use that word." The lieutenant's jaw dropped. Behind him, the soldiers murmured among themselves. "Your husbands? All of them?" "Yes," Elizabeth said firmly. "All of them. I married them according to Apache custom. It's legal in their way, and it's my choice." "Ma'am, that's not possible," the lieutenant said, finding his voice. "That's not legal. That's not Christian. That's not civilized. And who decides what's civilized?" Elizabeth shot back. "These men have treated me with more respect and kindness than most civilized men I've known. They've worked hard, provided for me, and never once forced me to do anything against my will." The lieutenant looked genuinely troubled. "Ma'am, I have orders. There's been complaints. People in the settlement say you've gone native, that you're a disgrace to decent society. The Fort Commander sent us to bring you back to civilization." "I don't want to go back," Elizabeth said. "I'm an adult woman. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm living on my own land that I own legally. You have no right to force me to leave." "Ma'am, please be reasonable," the lieutenant tried again. "You can't live like this. What will people think?" "I don't care what people think," Elizabeth said. "Those people never helped me when I was alone. They never checked on me when my husband died. They never offered assistance when I was struggling to survive. These men did. These men offered me family, partnership, protection. So forgive me if I don't care about the opinions of people who never cared about me." The standoff continued. The soldiers didn't want to use force against a white woman, but they had their orders. The Apache warriors stood ready to fight if necessary, but they preferred peace. Elizabeth stood between both worlds, trying to prevent bloodshed. Then something unexpected happened. Another rider approached, moving slowly and deliberately. An older woman on a dark horse wearing the simple dress of a missionary. She rode right through the military formation without asking permission and dismounted near Elizabeth. "Mrs. Hartwell," the lieutenant said, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about this situation," the woman said crisply, "and I came to see for myself before young men with guns did something foolish." She turned to Elizabeth, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You're Elizabeth Mitchell?" "I am," Elizabeth said warily. "And you're here voluntarily? These men haven't forced you or threatened you?" They've done nothing but help me, Elizabeth said. I chose this life. I know it's unconventional, but it's mine. Mrs. Hartwell studied her for a long moment, then looked at the 7 warriors. She walked closer to them, ignoring the lieutenant's protests, and spoke directly to Dakota. Do you hurt her? Never, Dakota said firmly. Does she have freedom to leave if she chooses? Always, Dakota confirmed. We want her to stay, but we not keep her prisoner. She's free person. Mrs. Hartwell nodded slowly. She turned back to the lieutenant. Young man, this woman is not a captive. She's making a choice you and I might not make, but it's her choice to make. If you drag her away from here against her will, you're the one taking away her freedom, not these men. But ma'am, the lieutenant protested, it's not proper. It's not right. Many things aren't proper by society's standards, Mrs. Hartwell said, but I've spent 30 years as a missionary on this frontier, and I've learned something important. Sometimes what we call civilization is just another word for cruelty, dressed up in nice clothes. These men have shown this woman more Christian charity than most Christians would. The lieutenant looked torn. He clearly didn't want to go against a respected missionary woman, but he also had his orders. Mrs. Hartwell made a proposition. What if we arrange for Mrs. Mitchell to visit the settlement periodically? Once every few weeks, perhaps. She can show everyone that she's healthy, happy, and here by choice. That way there's no need for military action, no bloodshed, and everyone can be assured of her well-being. Elizabeth thought about it. She didn't want to leave her home, but if periodic visits could prevent war, it was worth it. I can do that, she agreed. I'll come to the settlement once a month. You can see I'm fine, and then I'll come back home. The lieutenant still looked uncertain, but he was running out of options. I'll have to report this to the commander. But if Mrs. Hartwell is willing to vouch for the situation, and if you're willing to check in regularly, maybe we can avoid a confrontation. There's wisdom in that, Lieutenant, Mrs. Hartwell said. Sometimes the best solution isn't the one written in regulations. It's the one that prevents good people from dying over misunderstandings. After much discussion and negotiation, an agreement was reached. Elizabeth would visit the settlement monthly. Mrs. Hartwell would accompany her and report on her condition. In return, the military would leave the homestead alone. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. As the soldiers prepared to leave, the lieutenant approached Elizabeth one more time. Ma'am, I still don't understand your choice. But I respect your courage. Not many people would stand up to a cavalry patrol for what they believe in. Thank you, Lieutenant, Elizabeth said. I hope someday you'll understand that there are many ways to live a good life. Mine might not be traditional, but it's filled with more love and respect than many traditional marriages. After the soldiers left, Mrs. Hartwell stayed for tea. She sat in Elizabeth's home, accepted food from Bidziel's cooking, and talked with each of the warriors. Elizabeth watched her carefully, this woman who had spoken up for her when she didn't have to. Why did you help us? Elizabeth asked finally. Mrs. Hartwell smiled. Because I've been on this frontier long enough to know that love and family come in many forms. I've seen so-called Christian men beat their wives and drink away their children's food. And I've seen Apache families care for each other with devotion that would shame most church congregations. I judge people by their actions, not by whether they fit society's narrow definitions. But you're a missionary, Elizabeth said. Doesn't this go against what you teach? I teach that we should love one another, treat each other with kindness and respect, and build families that honor the sacred, Mrs. Hartwell said. From what I can see, that's exactly what you're all doing here. The form might be different, but the spirit is right. Before she left, Mrs. Hartwell gave Elizabeth her blessing and a promise. I'll make sure people in the settlement understand that you're here by choice and you're happy. I can't control what they all think, but I have some influence. And I'll use it to protect your peace. After Mrs. Hartwell rode away, Elizabeth sat with her 7 husbands as the sun set. They were all quiet, processing what had happened. That was close, Kurik said finally. Too close, but we handled it, Dakota said. We stayed calm. We talked instead of fought. This is good. Mrs. Hartwell surprised me, Elizabeth admitted. I expected judgment. I expected condemnation. Instead, she defended us. Some people see truth, Neil said. Some people see only what they expect to see. She sees truth. Goyathle, who had been especially tense during the confrontation, spoke up. This will happen again. Other people will come. Other problems will arise. The outside world will not leave us alone. Maybe not, Elizabeth agreed. But we'll face it together. That's what family does. Elsu put his hand on her shoulder. You were brave today. You stood up for us, for this family. You could have gone with them, gone back to easier life. But you stayed. The months after the cavalry's visit passed in a rhythm of work and learning. Elizabeth kept her promise, visiting the settlement once a month with Mrs. Hartwell. The visits were awkward at first. People stared, whispered. Some even refused to serve her in the general store. But Mrs. Hartwell stayed by her side, her presence a shield against the worst of the judgment. And slowly, very slowly, some people began to accept the situation. They might not understand it, but they could see Elizabeth was healthy, happy, and there by choice. Winter came to the Arizona desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. The expanded house proved its worth, keeping everyone warm and comfortable. The warriors taught Elizabeth how to prepare for winter in the Apache way, storing food, preserving meat, making sure nothing would be wasted. She taught them her methods too, and together they created a hybrid system that worked better than either approach alone. It was during these long winter evenings, gathered around the fire, that Elizabeth noticed something changing in her body. She'd missed her monthly cycle. Once, then twice, she felt different, tired in a way that wasn't from work. Her breasts were tender. She knew what it meant, but she was afraid to say it out loud. Desba, Nantan's sister, visited one cold afternoon. She took one look at Elizabeth and smiled knowingly. You carry child, she said simply. Elizabeth's hand went to her stomach instinctively. I think so. I'm not certain yet, but yes, I think I might be. This good news, Desba said warmly. Child is blessing. Family needs children. That evening, Elizabeth gathered all 7 of her husbands and told them. The room went completely silent. 7 pairs of eyes stared at her, processing the information. Then Kurik let out a whoop of joy that shattered the silence, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. A baby, Ashki said, his gentle face lit up with happiness. We will need to prepare, Dakota said, already thinking practically. I will hunt more, Goyathle promised. Make sure mother and child have everything they need. Bidzil was already planning meals. You need to eat good food now. Lots of meat, vegetables, everything healthy. Neil was quiet, but his eyes shone. A child who will know both worlds. This is important. This is special. Elsu touched her hand gently. Are you happy about this? Elizabeth realized she was crying, but they were happy tears. Yes, I'm happy. I'm also scared, but mostly happy. Whose child is it? Kuruk asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, I should not ask. No, it's a fair question, Elizabeth said. But I don't know. And I realize something. I don't think it matters. This child will belong to all of us. We're all family. That's what makes this work. Dakota nodded slowly. This is wise thinking. In Apache way, all children belong to whole family. Uncles teach same as fathers. Aunts care same as mothers. This child will have 7 fathers. This is great fortune for child. Over the following months, Elizabeth watched her body change with wonder and some anxiety. She'd never been pregnant before. And despite having 7 attentive husbands, there were things about the experience that felt lonely and frightening. What if something went wrong? What if she couldn't do this? But the warriors surprised her with their care. Bidzil made special foods to help with her morning sickness. Ashki brought her wildflowers to cheer her up. Goyathle insisted on doing all the heavy work so she wouldn't strain herself. Neil told her stories about Apache beliefs regarding pregnancy and children. Elsu found medical books in the settlement and read everything about childbirth. Dakota coordinated everyone's efforts, making sure she was never overwhelmed but always supported. And Kuruk, young and enthusiastic, treated her like she was made of glass, constantly asking if she needed anything. The Apache women visited more frequently. They brought gifts, shared wisdom, and taught Elizabeth what to expect. Desba became especially close, almost like the sister Elizabeth had left behind years ago. These women who could have resented her instead embraced her, brought her into their circle, made her truly part of the tribe. As Elizabeth's pregnancy progressed, she found herself teaching her husbands to read and write with renewed energy. She wanted their child to know both languages, both cultures, both ways of understanding the world. In the evenings, they would sit together, and she would help them practice their letters. Dakota was the fastest learner, picking up reading quickly. Bidzil struggled but never gave up. Ashki had a natural feel for language. Goyatle approached it like a warrior approaching a battle, with determination and strategy. Njol was thoughtful and precise. Elsu asked endless questions about why words were spelled certain ways, and Kuruk, the youngest, threw himself into learning with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything. In return, they taught her more Apache. She learned to speak it conversationally, to understand the stories they told, to appreciate the poetry in their language. She learned their beliefs about the land, about spirits, about the connection between all living things. Her worldview expanded, becoming richer and more complex. Spring came, and with it, new life everywhere. The garden burst into growth. The desert bloomed with unexpected flowers, and Elizabeth's belly grew round and full. She moved more slowly now, but she was healthy and strong. The compound they'd built together was thriving. More Apache families had begun settling nearby, drawn by the example of cooperation and peace. The area was becoming a small community where two cultures met and mingled. One warm evening, when Elizabeth was about 7 months along, a conflict arose. It was bound to happen eventually, with 7 strong-willed men living together. Goyatle and Elsu got into an argument about the best way to expand the irrigation system. Voices rose, tension grew, and for a moment Elizabeth feared it might come to blows. But it was Kuruk, the youngest, who stepped between them. "Stop," he said firmly. "This is not our way. We argue, but we do not fight each other. We are brothers. We are family. Elizabeth is watching. What do we show her? What do we show the child who will come?" His words cut through the anger. Both men stepped back, shamefaced. Then they did something that touched Elizabeth deeply. They apologized, not just to each other, but to everyone present. They acknowledged their anger, talked through the real issue, and found a compromise. It wasn't perfect, but it was mature and respectful. Later, Elizabeth pulled Kuruk aside. "That was well done," she told him. "You're growing into a fine man." Kuruk beamed at the praise. "I learned from watching Dakota. From watching you. When people love each other, they find ways to fix problems without hurting each other." As summer approached, Elizabeth became increasingly uncomfortable. The baby was active, kicking and moving constantly. She couldn't sleep well. Her back ached and simple tasks became exhausting. But through it all, her 7 husbands were patient and supportive. They took on more of the work, made sure she rested, and never complained about the extra burden. Mrs. Hartwell visited more frequently as the due date approached. She'd become a true friend, bringing supplies from the settlement, sharing news, and offering advice. She'd also arranged for a doctor from the fort to be available if needed, though Desba and the Apache midwives would handle the actual birth. "You've built something remarkable here," Mrs. Hartwell said one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching the men work. "I know society doesn't approve, but I've seen more genuine love and partnership here than in most conventional marriages I've witnessed." "It hasn't been easy," Elizabeth admitted. "There are challenges. Sometimes I miss having just one person to focus on, one simple relationship, but then I see what we've created together, this community, this family, and I know it's worth every difficult moment." "How do you manage jealousy?" Mrs. Hartwell asked curiously. 7 men sharing one woman. There must be conflicts. Elizabeth thought about it. There are moments of tension, yes, but we talk about it. We don't let things fester. And I think because they're all family, brothers and cousins who grew up together, they know how to share in a way most people don't. They were raised with this possibility. It's not foreign to them like it would be to men from my world. One night, about a week before her due date, Elizabeth woke suddenly. Something felt different. She lay still, trying to understand what had changed, and then she felt it. A tightening across her belly. A cramping that started low and spread upward. Another contraction followed, then another. The baby was coming. She called out softly, and within moments, Dakota was there. "It is time?" he asked. "I think so," Elizabeth said, fear and excitement mixing in her voice. The household erupted into organized chaos. Someone rode for Desba and the midwives. The women arrived quickly, having been on standby for days. They took over Elizabeth's room, setting up everything needed for the birth. The 7 warriors were banished outside, told firmly that this was women's work and they would only be in the way. Elizabeth labored through the night. It was hard, harder than anything she'd ever done. The pain was intense, frightening, overwhelming. But Desba stayed by her side, coaching her through each contraction, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. The other women supported her, held her hands, wiped her face, told her she was strong enough to do this. Outside, the 7 men paced and worried. They could hear Elizabeth's cries of pain, and it tore at them. Goyathle wanted to go in, to protect her somehow. Dakota kept everyone calm. The years after Halona's birth were transformative in ways Elizabeth could never have imagined. Her daughter grew from a tiny infant into a curious, energetic child who seemed to belong equally to both worlds. She spoke Apache and English with equal fluency, moved between cultures as easily as breathing, and had 7 devoted fathers who each contributed something unique to her upbringing. Dakota taught her strategy and leadership. Biziel made her laugh and taught her joy in simple things. Ashki showed her gentleness and respect for all living creatures. Goyathle trained her to be strong and fearless. Niol shared wisdom and stories under the stars. Elsu encouraged her endless questions and curiosity. And Kuruk played with her for hours, never too busy or too important to get down on the ground and see the world through a child's eyes. Elizabeth watched her daughter thrive and felt profound gratitude. But Halona wasn't the only change. The small community around their homestead continued to grow. More Apache families settled nearby, drawn by the peace and prosperity. Some settlers, ostracized by mainstream society for various reasons, also came seeking acceptance. A man who'd married an Apache woman, a widow with mixed-race children, people who didn't fit into the neat boxes society demanded. Elizabeth found herself becoming a leader in this emerging community, though she'd never sought the role. People came to her with disputes, seeking her perspective that bridged both cultures. She helped negotiate trade agreements between the Apache families and distant settlements. She taught reading and writing to anyone who wanted to learn, Apache and settler children sitting side by side in her home. Mrs. Hartwell visited often, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. She'd become more than a friend. She was an advocate, a bridge to the broader society, someone who defended their community when others attacked it. Through her influence, a fragile but real peace had developed. It wasn't perfect, and there were still those who wanted to destroy what they'd built, but it held. 3 years after Halona's birth, Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more excitement. She knew what to expect, had confidence in the process. The entire community celebrated. More children meant hope for the future, proof that their way of life was sustainable. This pregnancy was easier than the first. Elizabeth worked almost until the day of the birth, helped by Halona, who loved to be involved in everything. When the time came, it was faster, smoother. Another daughter was born, this one with lighter skin and hair the color of desert sand at sunset. They named her Amma, meaning water, because she'd been conceived during the rainy season when the desert bloomed. If possible, the 7 warriors loved Amma even more fiercely because she'd come when they thought they couldn't be happier. 2 daughters, 2 chances to shape the future, 2 bridges between worlds. The years continued to pass. Halona grew into a smart, capable girl who could track like an Apache and read like a scholar. Amma followed in her sister's footsteps, curious and bold. The homestead expanded into a small village. Other unusual families formed, inspired by Elizabeth's example. A woman married 3 Apache brothers. An Apache woman took 2 settler husbands. The community became a place where love and partnership mattered more than society's rules. Elizabeth's 7 husbands grew older alongside her. Dakota's hair went from gray to white, but his mind stayed sharp. Bijiel's laughter lines deepened, etched by years of joy. Ashki remained gentle, now teaching the community's children. Goyathle's warrior days were behind him, but he was still the community's protector. Niol became the elder people sought for wisdom. Elsu could still fix anything, his hands skilled despite arthritis. And Kuruk, no longer the youngest but still eager, became a leader in his own right. Elizabeth aged too. Her hands grew rough from years of work, her face lined by sun and time, but she'd never been happier. She'd found something rare and precious, true belonging, a place where she fit, where she was valued, where her unique perspective made a difference. One evening, when Halona was 12 and Amma was 9, they all gathered for a meal. The extended community was there, dozens of people who'd found refuge in this accepting place. As Elizabeth looked around at the faces, some Apache, some settler, some mixed, all family, she felt overwhelmed with emotion. Halona noticed. Mother, why are you crying? Happy tears, Elizabeth said, wiping her eyes. I'm thinking about how different my life could have been. I was so alone once, so lonely. I thought that was just how life would be. But then you saved Grandfather Nantang, Halona said. She'd heard the story many times but never tired of it. I did, Elizabeth confirmed, and he sent your fathers to me. 7 men who offered me something impossible, something I almost said no to because I was scared. What made you say yes? Amma asked. Elizabeth thought about it. I realized that being alone wasn't strength. Being brave enough to accept help, to accept love, to try something different even when it was scary, that was real strength. Dakota, sitting nearby, reached over and took her hand. You made us complete, he said simply. Before you, we were surviving. After you, we were living. We were all surviving, Elizabeth corrected, and then we found each other and learned how to truly live. More years passed. The outside world continued to change. The frontier was shrinking, settlements growing, the old ways giving way to new. The tensions between Apache people and settlers remained, sometimes erupting into violence. But their little community, this bridge between worlds, endured. It became known as a place of peace, a model of what could be when people chose understanding over fear. Elizabeth's daughters grew into remarkable young women. Halona married an Apache man and a settler man, creating her own unconventional family. She'd learned from her mother that love wasn't limited, that family could take many forms. Amma became a teacher, educating children from both cultures, passing on the hybrid knowledge she'd inherited. Elizabeth became a grandmother, then a great-grandmother. She watched her family tree grow and spread, branches intertwining in complex and beautiful patterns. Every child born represented hope, represented the possibility of a world where people didn't have to choose between cultures, but could embrace both. Her 7 husbands remained devoted to the end. Elsu was the first to pass, dying peacefully in his sleep at 73. The community mourned him deeply. Then Goyathle, his warrior's body finally giving out. Then Neol whispering wisdom until his last breath. Each loss hurt, but Elizabeth took comfort knowing they'd lived full, meaningful lives. When Elizabeth was 68, she sat on her porch with her remaining husbands, Dakota, Bidzil, Ashki, and Karuk. They were all old now, weathered by time but not broken. The homestead had grown into a thriving village of over 100 people. The house they'd expanded so many times was now the community center, where people gathered to settle disputes, celebrate marriages, welcome new children. Do you have regrets? Dakota asked her. He was 81 now, the oldest, but still sharp. Elizabeth considered the question carefully. I regret the years I spent alone before finding you. I regret the time I wasted being afraid. But I don't regret saying yes to you. I don't regret building this family, this community, this life. We are fortunate men, Bidzil said, to have known your love, to have built this with you. I'm the fortunate one, Elizabeth insisted. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. Ashki smiled his gentle smile. We gave each other everything. That is what family means. Do you think it will last? Kuruk asked, gesturing to the village. After we are gone, will people remember what we built? Yes, Elizabeth said with certainty. Because we didn't just build buildings. We built a way of thinking, a way of being. We proved that people from different worlds cannot just coexist but thrive together. We proved that love multiplies instead of dividing. Our children and grandchildren carry that knowledge. They'll pass it on. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Elizabeth reflected on her extraordinary life. She'd come to this land as someone's wife, become a widow, survived alone, and then became something unprecedented. A woman with 7 husbands. A bridge between cultures. A founder of a community that shouldn't have worked but did. Society had judged her. Many still did. But she'd stopped caring about those judgments decades ago. What mattered was the life she'd lived, the love she'd known, the family she'd created, and the legacy she'd leave behind. Elizabeth lived to be 76, surrounded by her family when she passed. Dakota held her hand, the last of her 7 husbands, tears streaming down his ancient face. Halona and Amma were there, along with dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She died peacefully, knowing she'd lived fully, loved deeply, and made a difference in the world. At her funeral, people came from miles around. Apache elders who remembered Nantan, settlers who'd learned to respect the unusual community. Mrs. Hartwell, now elderly herself, spoke about Elizabeth's courage and vision. The 7 husbands, those who'd survived, were honored as her partners in creating something new. They buried her on a hill overlooking the village, with a headstone that read simply, Elizabeth Mitchell, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, friend. She lived in solitude until love found her. She built a bridge between worlds.